Senator, beginning with you, I know you were watching the briefing as well there at the Pentagon. Let's start with the Strait of Hormuz. And Secretary Hegseth had a lot of media criticism during that briefing. He also rebutted what has been widespread reporting that the U.S. was taken by surprise, in fact, that Iran was able to seize control of the Strait of Hormuz, more or less close it. And, you know, suggesting that, well, this is not an issue. He says, don't need to worry about it. But yet, not just the oil markets, but we know that in the administration, they're deeply concerned. This is a real pivot point for this conflict.
I can tell you, Jonathan, that if Secretary Hegseth is not worried about the Strait of Hormuz, he may be one of the handful of people on the planet who is not deeply worried about the choke point that Iran can impose there. And from all accounts, and I'll tell you based on my classified briefings, there has been inadequate planning for what is happening now in Iran, able and eager to stop the flow of oil and cripple the world economy if necessary. And what we have here is a war of whim and impulse, not even a war of choice, because the word choice implies a rational and calculated approach. But what's happening to the world markets on oil and what we're doing, for example, in rewarding Russia, giving them a windfall by lifting sanctions on Russian sales of oil, we have yet to grapple with Russia's aiding Iran, not only with targeting information, but in other ways as well. So this widening, expanding war is deeply worrisome. And
there's never been a conflict where air power alone brought along regime change. And you came out of one of those classified briefings earlier this week, and you were visibly upset and said you were concerned at the possibility of ground troops in Iran. Now, again, we understand there's a limit to what you can say, but tell us what you can as to why you now have that fear.
Well, first, let me say, Jonathan, as a dad whose two sons served, one as a combat infantry officer in Afghanistan, Marine Corps, and the other as a Navy SEAL, I know what those families of all of the men and women in harm's way are going through right now, laying awake at night, wondering what's happening there. And the families who've lost loved ones, my heart goes out to them. What we see is a war with a variety of objectives, none of them clear: destroying enriched uranium, regime change, missile production and capacity, and stopping terrorism that's sponsored by Iran. None of these objectives is accomplishable by bombing alone. It has never worked, most recently in Afghanistan and Iraq. We controlled the airspace, we bombed, and the results speak for themselves. So what I fear is that the objectives, if they maintain them, are achievable only with some presence on the ground. The president continues to talk about special operation forces to secure the enriched uranium. There are hundreds of pounds of it, and also to accomplish regime change. He wants to choose the next leader, and Secretary Hegseth is talking about the potential disfigurement and injuries to the present one. The IRGC is firmly in control. There is no indication that its grip is weakened.
Senator, I want to ask you about, you just mentioned the uranium, and I don't want you to go into classified details, but how is the uranium in one location, multiple locations? Do we even know where it is? And what are the dangers in terms of U.S. forces trying to go in on the ground and get it? It's about 1,000 pounds, we've been told, of highly enriched uranium. Just how is that achievable or not?
Well, again, I'm limited in terms of what I can say in the details, but any operation to secure that uranium, to take possession of it, will be extremely complex and costly. Now, let me just emphasize, we have yet to know the true costs of this war, even to date. The figure that we've been given, in my view, lowballs the expense so far, $11 billion. I think it's multiples of that amount. We have yet to know other critical facts about the location of the uranium, whether we really know where it is. So far, the information given to us, even in classified setting, I regard as wholly inadequate. But most important point, the American people deserve to know the answer to that question. There is no reason the American people can't be told the cost of the war or the potential costs of continuing this operation to secure that enriched uranium.
And Sam Stein, one of the costs, of course, we're seeing the price of oil go up. So the Trump administration has decided to lift sanctions, even just temporarily, they say, on some Russian oil, which is obviously benefits Vladimir Putin and his war machine. And it is so striking right now that at this moment in this conflict, Russia reportedly helping Iran with targeting American assets in the Middle East. Ukraine, meanwhile, actively trying to help the United States with drone technologies. And yet, in the last week or so, Trump's rhetoric is much harder on Zelensky, who he's deemed P.T. Barnum, say that Zelensky is the impediment to peace, not Putin. And this war in the Middle East almost underscores to Zelensky that actually that's what we care about. The plight of Ukraine, far less so.
Yeah, no, it's this weird sort of secondary element to the war where, like you said, the Ukrainians are helping us with this anti-drone technology. Trump continues to speak negatively about President Zelensky, urging him to bring an end to the war in Ukraine with Russia. And yet, at the same time, we're easing sanctions on Russia, which is aiding Iran. If you can follow that diagram, it's a lot of red strings going across the board. But it does raise the question, I suppose, to the senator, which is, can you speak a little bit to the geopolitics here? Obviously, China is quite dependent on Iranian oil. Obviously, Russia is aligned with Iran and helping them with things like satellite imagery and medical help. Is it possible that they end up emboldened by what's happening in the chaos in the Middle East? Or I've heard conversely the other argument, which is that, look, the pinch in the oil supply globally is really going to actually harm China, for instance, because they are so dependent on Iranian oil, whereas we are a domestic exporter of oil at this point.
Sam, great question. And I'm not a specialist in world predictions, but the one winner here, clear winner, seems to be Putin. The price of oil rising and the prospect of turmoil in the economic markets benefits him. It fuels his war machine in Ukraine. His economy is on its heels, and he depends very clearly on the sales of his oil and gas to China, India, Hungary, a handful of countries, which is why I have advocated so strongly and championed in the Senate a sanctions bill that will stop those sales. But what we see now is a rise in the price of oil that benefits him, and really outrageously, in my view, a lifting of sanctions on the sales of Russian oil and gas while Russia is providing aid to Iran in targeting our troops on the ground and our other assets. I have no explanation for why this administration would consider that kind of lifting of sanctions acceptable to our national interest.
Your colleague in the Senate, Brian Schatz, Democrat of Hawaii, posted on social media last night, looks like we fought Iran and Russia won. Susan Page, let's go to you, because I know you've been thinking about and writing about the political impact here at home. Certainly there's some in the Trump base, the America First piece of this, that wants nothing to do with the war with Iran. Most Republicans, though, are going along with it, even with reservations, which allows Democrats to sort of tie them to a war that politically is very unpopular. And you say this is going to make the GOP's midterms quest that much harder, particularly if oil prices keep rising.
No, that's right. The question is, can you have run a war and a midterm campaign at the same time? And it's hard to do. One thing, we know a majority of Americans oppose the war, even though the president continues to have the support of most Republicans. But I think the bigger political problem for the White House is that they're focusing on the issue that Americans care less about. Americans care less about the war in Iran than they do about their own economic situation. And that economic situation just gets worse if the price of gas continues to go up, as it has done. In fact, we expect to see rising prices now reflected in groceries, in airplane tickets, and elsewhere. So I think this is a conundrum for the White House. And just one last thing. It's possible for the president to declare victory and end the war. Secretary Hegseth made that clear again this morning. But it's hard to imagine he can declare victory when the Strait of Hormuz is still under the control of the Iranian supreme leader and the Islamic regime there.
Yeah, the mess that would be left behind if he were to suddenly declare victory and make a hasty exit would be remarkable. So, Senator, just a moment ago, you said you are not a world predictor, but you are introducing new legislation pertaining to the intensely popular prediction markets. So talk to us about that and tell us how you think this bill will prevent fraud and abuse, because it does seem like nearly every day there's a new story about these prediction markets, and they do seem rife for corruption.
Well, Jonathan, there is a tie to the Iran war, because literally on the eve of the Iran war, there was a surge of betting. These prediction markets are a form of gambling and betting and wagering that, in effect, said this war is going to begin. And people made hundreds of thousands of dollars on those bets. There's every indication, every sign of insider information and trading. In other words, market manipulation based on national security information being leaked, which is only one additional sign of the need for some kind of regulation, which is what I have proposed on these prediction markets. We have regulation of sports betting online. 39 states have legal sports betting. Prediction markets are slightly different insofar as there are buying of stock on events contracts. I know it sounds technical, but it is more or less the same thing as betting, with all the dangers, underage gambling and addiction and market manipulation, trading on insider information. So we would ban bets on war, deaths, military action, and we would require regulation by the same standards that apply to online gambling and strengthen those standards to make the criteria protect people who are vulnerable and our society.
Feels like common sense stuff to me. Democratic member of the Armed Services Committee, Senator Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut. Thank you, sir, for joining us this morning. MS Now senior national security reporter David Rohde. David, thank you as well. We'll talk